Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts has prided itself for generations on opening its doors to international students from almost 40 countries. In 1985, the New York Times published an article called Andover's Opening to China Studies about the Harbin Institute of Technology and their educational exchange with Phillips Academy. But this was not the first time Chinese students had come to study at Andover, nor the first time their coming had been formally documented.
The history of Chinese students at Andover is particularly unique. We really do not have material in the archives relating to other ethnic groups on the scale that we do for Chinese students.
Dr. Roberts approached me about this archive, and it was the first time I had gotten to know about this robust set of archives and documents.
The collection that we have on Chinese students is particularly extraordinary, which speaks to the really amazing history of that connection that we have over the years.
What she had told me was that her and her student volunteers, as well as some work study students, had digitized some of about a quarter of the archives. Instinctively I thought we need to digitize the rest, and then we should teach about this archive.
One such student in the archives was Frank Lin, class of 1923. Lin's correspondences with then Andover head of school Dr. Alfred E. Stearns from 1921 to his graduation from MIT in 1927 were well preserved, offering us glimpses into his mind and his memories. Following Lin, many more generations of international students from China and other Asian countries would continue making memories at Phillips Academy.
I was the first person in my family to study abroad in the US at a boarding school, so we had no idea which were kind of good schools or which were bad schools. A family friend of ours wrote down like 6 or 7 boarding schools on a piece of napkin while we were having lunch. So the deal that I made with my parents was that if I were to get accepted in any of those schools, then I would get the opportunity to study in the U.S. If not, then I would have finished my studies in Korea.
I came here because it has become an increasingly become a choice for Chinese students to go abroad, and increasingly at lower education levels. Like, no one in my family did come to study. I chose to apply because I spoke English well, and I didn't really need to take extra classes on English like someone else would. So that really gave me a little bit of a step up. So we're like, why not?
It is unclear from his letters if Lin had any other family studying in America. However, we do know that he had many friends among the other Chinese students, including Arthur Sun from his hometown of Tianjin, China, with whom he frequently traveled to and from school. On December 16, 1922, he writes to Stearns, "I have not seen Arthur for quite a few days. Perhaps he is very busy about his exams. I think Arthur and I will come to Andover on the same day."
Sometimes a very small community that existed in Korea almost transplanted itself to Boston. Because there are a lot of boarding schools in this area, not only Andover, but also other boarding schools in New England area, where a lot of my friends back home ended up at as well. So we would end up having some sort of a small reunion in Boston.
On June 26, 1922, Stearns writes of Lin to P.L. Chang, the Lin family banker at the Russo-Asiatic Bank in Tianjin. He and his friend Quincy Xie make a great pair, and it has been a real privilege to have them under my roof and guidance during these recent months.
I was supposed to actually come in as an upper, but then I decided to repeat a year. I was anticipating I would probably struggle. Not only was I switching from a Korean educational system to a US, but I was given a lot of advice about how rigorous the academics are at Andover. I didn't really think of it as repeating a year because they were two very different curriculum. These were the toughest academically that I've experienced. I've went to undergraduate school, I went to grad school and everything, but academically, Andover was most challenging.
Nam's sentiments about the difficulty of academic adjustment were echoed by Lin, who often wrote about his worries over bad exam results and supplementary academic efforts outside of school. On August 9, 1921, Lin writes to Stearns and says, "The next day I received the report of PA Academy which you sent to me. I am ashamed to say I got low marks on all the subjects. I hope I can get better marks next year."
The expectation is that maybe most of these people studied sciences, and most of these students were probably the best of the best. So that's kind of what I expected. Some governments in Korea, Japan, China, and also Vietnam sending students and scholars abroad to learn new ideas to come back and use them, mostly for modernizing purposes. But I didn't know what the archives would show us, demonstrate.
Lin received an engineering degree from MIT with the intention of serving China upon his return. However, it was actually STEM classes that he needed the most assistance in throughout high school and university. On July 25th, 1921, Lin wrote to Stearns from Cockermouth Camp in Groton, New Hampshire, his summer camp, about his extra studies. He says, "After meals, we have a rest hour. The counselors read stories to us. At that time, I have my tutoring on geometry." Even a year later, on November 21st, 1922, Lin still expresses concern about his grades. He writes again to Stearns, "The physics teacher gave us a table of vacant hours in which all students who had trouble in the first 5 weeks can ask his help. I have proved to my calculus and chemistry teachers that I really can follow the course and really know something about it. It was only a hard luck that I got 2 L's. Low passing." Shu, on the other hand, has different plans altogether for the future.
I want to study sociology and potentially minor in environmental studies.
There was something there that we could historically examine to see, oh, well, maybe they were much more, they weren't just nerds. Maybe the stereotype that they were all science students did not happen. It's an investigation, right? It's an investigation into the history of the school to find out more about the Asian population of this school beyond this current era.
Then, how do we humanize the archive subjects? And how do we humanize each other, even presently, in the written record? To understand the commonplace, everyday things that students' lives at Andover are comprised of, we must collect the things that aren't easily quantifiable in records, the private memories, experiences, struggles, and triumphs that might go overlooked.
You feel like the correspondence really kind of brings people to life. Someone like Frank Lin, where you can see him on his first day at MIT being really stressed out, and it just feels so alive.
I did swimming and cross country. I've also just picked up squash.
I played soccer fall, and then I wrestled in the winter, and then I did track in spring. To be honest, my primary motivation for doing track and spring was because you get to sit around a lot in really nice weather. But I think wrestling in winter was what I considered as my primary athletic activity throughout the year. The sense of camaraderie within the wrestling team was something that I hadn't experienced in the past. Soccer was something that I had played since I was a child. But I was surprised how competitive people were once I got here. My God.
Lin, a soccer player as well, writes to Stearns on October 13th, 1922, "Now I am out freshman soccer team every afternoon. A Boston Chinese soccer team was organized a few days ago. The first game will be with Andover on 14th October at Old Campus. Tomorrow we have a holiday, so I have no work to do tonight. But I have to be on Tech Field for practice tomorrow at 10. The year before, while at summer camp, Lin wrote on July 25th, 1921, "At that time, I and several boys in camp were practicing baseball, for we were going to have a ball game with the Groton boys. I am glad to tell you that we won that game last Saturday, with the score 7-4 in our favor."
So I lived in Eden Cottage my freshman year, and for the rest 3 years I've been living in Adams, which is an upperclassmen girls dorm. And I had a roommate my first 2 years, and then I had a single upper year in senior year. I really like decorating my room.
What do you decorate your room with?
I collect random posters and little things, and I try to put them up. So right now my room is themed blue and brown, and it's pretty cool.
My final year, I lived in this house called Johnson. I'm not sure if it's still around. Our upper year, my house counselor was this English teacher. He's retired since Mr. Stableford. So he was my house counselor in my upper year, and he's the one who moved into that cottage in my senior year. So we 6 of us followed him.
I do a lot of music, actually. I do chamber music, jazz band, and I do solo piano stuff. I also am part of International Club, the Philippian, and I do community engagement as well, like Science Club for Girls, and I volunteered in Bread Loaf, Pen Pals.
part of International Club is the president.
Yeah, I'm on the board of International Club.
I think I was vice president or something of the International Students Association, which is a big thing for me and for the rest of the international students.
Like Shu and Nam, Lin often took part in cultural events and traveled around New England for them. On August 24th, 1924, Lin writes to Stearns, "At the beginning of next month, I am going to the Chinese Students' Conference in Haverford, Pennsylvania."
One thing that I always question is how do we treat Asians and Asian Americans in this school? What are the issues involved with Asians and Asian Americans? And part of the answer to that question has been that there have been a lot of silences and gaps. It seems as if, by and large, the students at this time had a pretty amazing experience, and it was pretty satisfactory. And in fact, for Liang Cheng, one of the first graduates of Phillips Academy, who was part of the Chinese education mission in the late 19th century, he was so ecstatic that he set up another program for students to come through the Boxer Indemnity program. That being said, we know that it wasn't all peaches and roses, and we know that there was probably a little bit of tension, but it's not something that's necessarily reflected in the archive, which is an interesting thing because that shows that it's a partial record, and that's why we need to delve further and think further about how to read these archives in a more holistic sense.
I actually initially really rejected the Asian American identity. So there was probably a few months or even a year when Miss CH would actually she would talk to me about being Asian American, and I was like, wait, but I'm not Asian American because there's nothing in me that says American. So I was very straightforward about that first when I came here, until she talked to me once, and Miss CH actually said something like, you're going to be here for at least 8 years, so you have to integrate somehow into the Asian American community. And since then, I have actually been working to try to integrate the international Asian into the Asian community.
Subsequent to arriving here at Andover was the first time that I actually interacted with Korean Americans. One of the things that I found very interesting was a different sense of identity of being a Korean that I had as a Korean from Korea versus the vision of the definition of what a Korean identity means from the perspective of a Korean American, and kind of understanding this kind of the subtle differences between the two. I thought that was very interesting.
If you think Asian American, all the international Asians are not really necessarily part of that group. And by this, I mean they didn't grow up necessarily with Hannah Montana or all the childhood classics. I never grew up watching SpongeBob or the Powerpuff Girls and the other things that I can't name. Maybe they don't celebrate things and have the same childhoods and memories, the collective memory that is part of being Asian American, and especially the kind of activism and awareness of identity and discrimination that Asian Americans have. That's not built in for international Asians.
Sometimes we'll have ethnic nights now.
Oh yeah, we used to have that too. We used to have this mystery cabbage kimchi that it was called kimchi, but it was a mystery lettuce and mystery seasoning and dressing. It was fun. It was very cute. I think it was very cute. The effort that they were making. No, I don't think it was ever accurate. But I think I suppose we give the school a lot of credit for the effort it makes.
I think Andover is a pretty diverse community right now, and intentionally so. I do think, however, it is not what the real world looks like. Andover is not independent of the environment around it. But I do think we're a lot more aware of things. We do talk more about the things that we used to just feel and ignore and not really speak openly about.
While there are rarely mentions of racism or discrimination in Lin's records, the Chinese student conferences might have provided a space for Asian students to express their own feelings, had they experienced them, of discomfort or pain. If not traveling to these conferences, Lin was traveling during the summer and winter holidays, usually staying in the US, to Cockermouth Camp, or back to Andover. He writes to Stearns on December 16, 1922, "My Christmas vacation will begin on the 21st of this month, but I cannot say definitively when I can come to Andover. Probably I can leave here on 22nd.
I am fortunate enough to be able to go home like pretty often, and when I go back home, I usually get in touch with my friends back home.
I think homesickness wasn't something that that afflicted me that much while I was here, but I think I was just too busy just socializing.
I don't think I necessarily missed home that much, because I think most of the problems that I dealt with here was kind of like, it's not going to get better once I get home, so I didn't miss home in that sense. I didn't want to go home. And I think I was so focused on everything that was happening here that I really did not miss home until, say, like last year.
Essentially, I would be going home once a year during summer breaks, and you know the differences were huge when you're returning once a year.
I do actually sometimes write letters to a friend of mine, so I know like the kind of anticipation that it takes. Even in this age where you can literally text, it still is like the amount of unknown that goes with a letter, and because you have to send letters over long distances, I can really resonate with the amount of distance they had with their home. I can still imagine that they probably didn't talk as much as they would want to. Maybe that creates estrangement between the parents and the child because of long periods of not contacting and not being together. And I think that's something that's a common experience, I think. Like some people might not really think that's an issue, and maybe it comes up later in life for them.
As much as the archives can help us understand its subjects as people with vivid memories and experiences, there are still layers of separation between the archives community and its creators.
It's really hard, I think, to really resonate because the archives are just like one piece of their lives, and it's hard to even see any personal traces of like, oh, this is how I miss home, or like this is how I remember things.
So in some ways it feels like both very personal and yet also a bit impersonal. In some ways it can be hard to get a sense of what was it like to be one of those students here.
I think to me it's not that personal, and I wish I could see like their personal diaries or journals or something like that. But one thing I do kind of sense is the kind of distance.
Having the holistic or the reparative and conscientious understanding of your relation to a historical set of, in this case, archives, means that you're equally conscientious of how you understand the history of the school, and therefore your own the memories that you invoke, and also the imagined or reflective ideas that you have about that history. Nostalgia is really thinking, oh, it's a longing for the past. If you don't know anything about that past of Asian students here, how do you long for something? So I think part of the memory work that we're doing is really recounting these records of Asian or Chinese students here, and thinking through what they experience, and just trying to have a holistic, open, and empathetic kind of understanding. Not necessarily based on how we feel as Asians or Asian Americans at this school, but really thinking about the context in which they lived and being able to place that context into reading those archives. I think that's really important from a historical standpoint.
In some ways, I'd like to think the collective memory of this institution would be just richer, if nothing else, more nuanced, more complicated.
I would like to have not everyone, but like I would like to have maybe have a personal essay, not the personal statement, but a personal essay or a few personal essays, because I think that's what people will be able to maybe connect with.
With the fall 2019 history course Silences and Gaps, created and taught by Sun and Roberts, the study and in-depth synthesis of Phillips Academy's Chinese student archives has begun giving a voice to the silent microhistories stored in these documents. By researching the generations that came before them and their memories, current Asian and Asian American students are revolutionizing the collective memory of our past.